Welcome, everyone. Today we're doing a focused deep dive, looking at the influence of Jesus Christ. Specifically, we'll be exploring this through, well, two particular lenses, Christian history and also psychology.
That's right. We've got quite a range of sources to draw from, and it's a fascinating approach, seeing how historical shifts and theological ideas connect with the psychological side of things, how people actually experience these teachings.
Our goal here, really, is to try and understand the transformative power behind Jesus' message and actions from these viewpoints. So, where should we start? Maybe with love and forgiveness. That seems pretty central.
Definitely central. The sources really highlight this concept of agape love. It's described as selfless, unconditional, more than just a feeling. It's an active choice for someone else's well-being.
Even for outsiders, or even enemies, which is quite radical. The Gospel of Luke, for instance, is full of examples where Jesus shows this kind of love, especially towards people on the margins of society.
And psychologically, that idea of love as an active choice is really key. It suggests it's something we can cultivate through intention and action, not just wait for the feeling to strike. It's about deciding to act for another's good.
That's a powerful idea. And then there's forgiveness. Jesus' teachings on this were, well, revolutionary for the time, weren't they?
Absolutely. Free forgiveness, repeated forgiveness, the whole 70 times 7 idea. And crucially, it's often linked to our own ability to receive forgiveness from God.
How does that connect psychologically? Holding on to anger, it feels damaging.
It is. Research backs that up. Holding resentment is taxing, emotionally, even physically. Forgiveness, even when it's incredibly hard, it disrupts those negative patterns. It can bring real healing.
So it aligns with modern therapy ideas, like cognitive behavioral approaches.
Very much so. It mirrors the emphasis on how our thoughts and deliberate actions can shape our emotional state. Processing and releasing past hurts is often central to psychological well-being.
And historically, this wasn't just personal, was it? This agape love idea, it seems to have fueled real social change.
Oh, absolutely. You see it inspiring care for the vulnerable right from the earliest Christian communities, taking care of widows, orphans, the sick. It wasn't just theory. It shaped how people lived together.
And that impulse continued, right? Through centuries, inspiring hospitals, charities.
Exactly. Though, of course, the sources also acknowledge the struggle. Fully living out this kind of universal love in a world full of conflict. That's always been the challenge, hasn't it?
It has. But it seems Jesus really elevated these concepts, love, forgiveness, making them universal principles, not just for one's own group.
Precisely. Extending that compassion even to those seen as other or hostile. That universality is a big part of his enduring influence, historically and psychologically.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. What about Jesus' treatment of women and children? Our sources paint a picture of them being quite marginalized in first century Palestine.
They were, definitely. And Jesus' interactions were remarkably countercultural in that context. He didn't just tolerate women's presence. He actively included them. He taught them, engaged them in serious theological discussions.
Like the Samaritan woman at the well. That's a striking example.
It really is. Having that kind of deep conversation with a woman, especially a Samaritan woman, was just not done. And then think about the resurrection accounts appearing first to women, trusting them to spread the news. In a time when women's testimony wasn't always valued legally, well, it's significant.
And his view of children, too. Let the little children come to me. Using a child as an example of humility needed to enter the kingdom. That feels different.
It was profoundly different. Psychologically speaking, think about the impact of that validation. Being seen, heard, valued, especially when society tends to overlook you, is fundamental for healthy development and self-worth. Jesus' actions were a direct challenge to that devaluation.
And did this carry through historically? Did early Christian communities reflect this?
We see evidence of it, yes. Women serving as deacons, maybe even apostles, a real emphasis on caring for widows and orphans. But again, the sources are clear that the path wasn't straightforward. Cultural biases are strong.
So the struggle to fully realize that vision continued.
Absolutely. And you can draw lines to today, can't you? Issues around gender equality, protecting children, #MeToo. It highlights that the work Jesus started, elevating those pushed to the margins, is still very much ongoing.
It really frames it as a continuous call to action.
Yes. His approach established a different way of seeing human value, irrespective of social standing. It laid groundwork, even if building on it is a constant process.
Let's talk about law and human rights. How did Jesus' teachings influence those areas? It seems rooted in a core idea about human dignity.
Exactly. The idea that humans are created in God's image that provides a foundation for inherent worth and dignity.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a theological point. It had practical implications.
How so?
Well, his emphasis on love, compassion, caring for the vulnerable, these ideas gradually seeped into legal thinking, pushing towards protections for those who might otherwise be exploited. Think about the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Right, expanding the whole idea of who our neighbor is, who we have responsibility towards.
Precisely. And historically, you can trace this influence, albeit complexly, through the development of Western legal traditions, ideas about equality before the law, the movements to abolish slavery, developing labor rights, social welfare systems.
Even influencing international law, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Many scholars see echoes of these Judeo-Christian principles of dignity and compassion in the foundations of modern human rights law. Of course, implementation is always messy. Human nature, political resistance. It's never simple.
And there's always the danger of misinterpretation, right? Using religious ideas for purposes they weren't intended for.
That's a constant tension, which is why careful, contextual understanding is so important. But the core impulse stemming from Jesus' teachings towards justice and protecting the vulnerable has undeniably shaped legal and human rights frameworks.
And it remains relevant for contemporary debates. Criminal justice reform, economic justice.
Very much so. These underlying principles continue to challenge us to examine our systems and ask if they truly reflect that inherent dignity and call to compassion.
Okay, let's move to another core theme. Helping the poor and sick. This seems absolutely central to his ministry.
Undeniably. His actions speak volumes, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, touching lepers, associated with those considered unclean or outcasts. It wasn't just talk, it was embodied practice.
And the teachings reinforce this. We mentioned the Good Samaritan.
Yes, that parable is key, broadening neighbor to include anyone in need. But also his more direct teachings about wealth and poverty. He issued strong warnings against materialism, the danger of serving wealth instead of God. Pretty radical stuff.
It sounds radical even today, honestly. Is there a psychological angle to this focus on helping others?
Oh, definitely. Acts of kindness and compassion. Helping those in need research consistently shows it benefits the giver as well as the receiver. It fosters connection, empathy, a sense of purpose and meaning in life.
And historically, this teaching obviously had a huge impact.
Huge. Beyond the early church's practices, think about the founding of hospitals, often by religious orders. The long tradition of Christian charities dedicated to serving the poor and sick globally. It's a direct legacy.
Yet the challenge of poverty and inequality persists massively.
It does. And the sources suggest the call isn't just for charity, but also for justice, addressing the root causes of poverty, working towards fairer economic structures, ensuring access to health care. It's about being, as some traditions say, Christ's hands and feet in the world.
There's also that powerful teaching in Matthew 25, isn't there? Seeing Christ in the poor and suffering, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.
Exactly. That completely reframes service. It's not just helping them, it's an encounter with the divine in them. It calls for a radical reorientation of our values towards self-giving love.
Which links back nicely to that initial concept of agape.
It all connects.
Okay, one last major area. How did Jesus change ideas about God? This seems like a fundamental shift.
It really was a paradigm shift. Jesus presented God not primarily as a distant, stern judge, but as a loving father. He even used the intimate term Abba.
Like daddy or papa. That's incredibly personal.
Exactly. And his parables often reinforce this. Think of the prodigal son, showing a father overflowing with forgiveness and welcome. He depicted a God who actively seeks out the lost, the marginalized, the ones who feel far away.
What's the psychological implication of seeing God that way?
It could foster what psychologists call a secure base, feeling loved, accepted, inherently worthy, regardless of your flaws or failures. For people carrying wounds or trauma related to judgment or rejection, this image of a loving, seeking God can be incredibly healing.
And this obviously shaped Christian theology and practice profoundly over time.
Immensely. It also involved a challenge to mere external ritualism. Jesus emphasized inner transformation, worshiping in spirit and in truth, not just going through the motions.
And he claimed a unique relationship with this Father God, didn't he? Saying things like, I and the Father are one.
Yes, and he invited his followers into that same kind of intimate relationship. It wasn't just his Father, but our Father.
How does this transformed view of God remain relevant today in a world often marked by division?
Well, if God is understood primarily as loving, forgiving, and seeking reconciliation, that provides a powerful counter-narrative to hatred and division. It becomes the model for human relationships.
Though people still struggle with negative images of God based on various experiences or teachings.
They do. And perhaps Jesus' revelation of God, as Abba, offers a pathway towards healing those images, towards experiencing divine love rather than fear or condemnation.
So wrapping this up, across all these areas, love, forgiveness, valuing individuals, justice, understanding God, Jesus' teachings and actions, viewed through history and psychology, seem to have sparked deep, lasting transformations.
They really have. It's not just abstract theology. These ideas changed how people related to each other, how societies were structured, sometimes slowly, sometimes dramatically, and they continue to resonate with our deepest psychological needs for love, meaning, and justice.
And the challenge remains, doesn't it, to actually live these things out?
Always. The sources consistently point to that gap between the ideal and the reality, but the power of the vision continues to inspire and challenge.
It certainly gives you, the listener, a lot to think about how these historical currents and psychological insights might deepen your own understanding of Jesus' impact.
Indeed. Perhaps the final thought to leave you with is this. How do these perspectives challenge you? How might you engage with these principles of radical love, forgiveness, and human dignity in your own life and community today?